Please watch until the end of this episode for a very special announcement.
Welcome to the Sports Medicine Podcast brought to you by the Huffines Institute. I'm your host, Dr. Jenna Yentes, and I'm very excited about our guest today, who you'll probably recognize as the previous host of this podcast. He's been the face of it for many years, and this time he's behind the microphone. Dr. Tim Lightfoot is the Debbie and Mike Hilliard Endowed Professor of Kinesiology, and he's currently the director of the Sydney and J.L. Huffines Institute for Sports Medicine and Human Performance. Dr. Lightfoot received his bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Louisiana, Monroe, and then went on to do his PhD at the University of Tennessee. Following that, he did a postdoc at Johns Hopkins University, and then was faculty at Florida Atlantic University, and then North Carolina at Charlotte. Since being a faculty member, he has published over 85 peer-reviewed articles. He studies mainly the genetics of daily physical activity, exercise endurance, as well as physiological responses to high G exposure and hemorrhage. Dr. Lightfoot is a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine. He's also a certified exercise physiologist, a registered clinical exercise physiologist, the past president of the Southeast Regional Chapter of the American College of Sports Medicine, past member of the Board of Trustees for the American College of Sports Medicine. And he's got so many rewards and recognitions for his work in exercise physiology. We're not going to mention all of them here because that would take way too long. But what we do want to talk about are books that you've written, Dr. Lightfoot. So you have two books. You have one about finding a faculty job and then surviving as a faculty member. So you have quite a bit of experience in mentoring and helping those along the way. And so I guess what we're going to talk about today is your tidbits of advice for those individuals, students or faculty. So let's start with faculty. What are the key pieces that make a successful faculty member?
Well, thank you, Dr. Yentes, number one, for being the first guest on your turn on the podcast. Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be on this side of the desk. Anyway, I about 10 years ago, I was starting to think about our business, academia, and I think of that as a business, and how there's so few resources out there for people that are in our business, faculty members in particular, and doctoral students, and people that are trying to get in the business about how to do that. And that led me to start thinking about how can I write about this, and how can we write about this to provide kind of how-to guides for people that are in our business. And so we started to do that, and as a result of that, I started thinking more about what makes a good faculty member. I've been a faculty member for 33 years. I only look 29 years old. But I think I probably made every mistake in the book. And it's amazing many days that I'm still a faculty member. It's because I was a young man in a hurry. Mm-hmm. And when I landed my first faculty position, and I was pretty straightforward, and it was like, get out of my way. And so I really took an approach to my job that way. Fast forward, let's go. And I think over the years I've mellowed a bit, and maybe I've put some of those competitive urges a little bit behind me. And they weren't competitive as much as just like we had things to do. Mm-hmm. We had things to get done, and that's what we wanted to do. And I think a good faculty member works to temper that urge, because most of us have that. That's why we're in this business, with the realization that we are in a larger academic community and we have to work with a lot of people. Just in the situation that you and I are in our department, we're in one of the largest departments of our kind in the country. And at least for the next few weeks, I think I'll have 113 faculty members in our department. And so this is a very large academic community. I've worked in departments as small as 4 people and now as large as this one. And so you have to, good faculty members always have to remember they're part of that community, and they have to work together with other people. And that's beyond what you do in the classroom and beyond what you do in the lab. You really are building, you have to make a commitment to build a community. You're not a lone ranger. No one's a lone ranger in this business. If you were to ask me to tell you who all helps us on a daily basis move the Institute forward, it would take all the time of this podcast. And so we're part of a community. We have to recognize that, and we have to figure out how to get along in that community and make it better.
Very true. We do have to work together, but you used a term that some folks might not associate with academia. You called it the business of academia. And for listeners that may not be in academia, what do you mean by that?
Well, academia is a business like any other business. It's very much about money in many ways. We're constantly worried about how much money we're getting from the state, how much money we're getting from donors, how much money we're getting from research. Money drives the ship, unfortunately, whether we're a public university or a private university. So this is certainly a business. This is there are many processes for how we work in this business. And so people don't often think of academia as a business, as you said, but it is. And I use that kind of a shorthand to basically talk about academia as this is a process that, as a faculty member, you've got to figure out how to work within and how to deal with the politics and how to deal with all the students and all the different ways that they can come at you. So it's certainly a business. If in my position and in your position, if we weren't worried about money, then we're not doing something right.
I would completely agree with you. I think that was one of the surprises for me starting as a faculty member. That first year was running a lab is like running a small business, and I really was not prepared for budgets and management and all of the other pieces. I knew what I was doing scientifically, but on the other side, it was sort of that piece to learn.
Yeah, and our doctoral students, we work with doctoral students to help them move into the business. And our doctoral students often come in not realizing that side of the business. And that's my first book was How to Find a Faculty Job, the Best Faculty Job for You. And I talked a lot about that in that book, about the things that you have to recognize when you're going into this business. It's not just about learning the content. Everyone in our business knows their content inside out and backwards. But you also have to master the things that come about in this business, like, as you said, grant budgets, how to apply for grants, the hiring people, firing people. What do you do when your grant runs out with all the people in your lab? You know, those are the kinds of soft, squishy items that we don't do a very good job of teaching our students about before they get into the business.
I would agree with that. I think a lot of people are very ill-prepared for that, and it's kind of a real shock. When you're thinking about finding the best faculty position for giving advice to someone, the advice I always give is to tell people to think about what kind of life they want. You know, do they want to have children? Do they want to attend all the games? Or, I guess it's not an or do you want to be known in your field as, you know, having big grants and publishing a lot and being more famous? For me, those seem to be at odds with one another. What is the key pieces of advice that you give to someone when they're starting to look for a position?
Yeah, work-life balance is very difficult, especially in the early years of being an academic, because you have a relatively short period of time, and the audience may not realize this, but when you're hired as a faculty member, you basically have 5 years to establish yourself. At the end of that 5 years, in most cases, you go up for review, and if you have not performed according to what your peers think you're supposed to perform at, you lose your job. And so you have basically 5 years to set yourself up, usually as an expert in your field, both nationally and internationally. You have to do a great job in the classroom. You have to write for grant funding. These things are all happening at the same time, and they're a big load for people. And so it's really easy for someone to work 12, 14 hours a day. I did, as an early young faculty member, I worked easily 12 hours a day. And that really takes a toll on your personal life. And so at some point you have to decide what's more important. And keeping your job is more important. Yes, I understand that. But also you have to remember that you need to go home and be with your family in the evenings and be on the weekends and things like that. There are times that sacrifices have to be made, but you have to figure out how to be efficient with your time. And so that's a lot of what I think about now is how am I efficient with my time so I can get the most accomplished for the least possible time involved.
So I think of efficiency, I think of those that you hire and those that you work with. What are key things that you look for in students in your laboratory or doctoral students that you're going to bring on? What are some of those key features, or what is advice that you could give to students that want to work with someone like yourself?
I'm looking for people that have enthusiasm. And that's the first key point. I don't really look at anybody's records to see what they've done in the past. I could care less if they made what grades they have made. But if they're excited about what we're doing in the lab and they've done a little bit of online looking, and it's easy. anyone can find out what we're doing in the lab, not just us, but every faculty member. As a part of a public institution, we have to have those profiles up. And people can look at our curriculum vitas, they can find out what we've done. And so my advice for students is if you're interested in working in a lab, do a little background work, find out what the person has done. And if you're not interested in it, don't attempt to go work there. Because what I'm looking for when someone approaches me is I'm looking for someone that's excited about what we're doing, enthusiastic about it, and ready for the challenge. And that's the biggest thing. If they're excited and enthusiastic, that's what I bring to work. I hope that's what they bring to work.
I was once told that the way to pick a student is to imagine whether or not you can go on a road trip with them, ride in a car for a long period of time. I think that was Roger Crom that told me that from Colorado. So I don't know. Personality is a piece there.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to a faculty member that's struggling in managing those different personalities and those individuals in their labs?
Yeah, and I think all of us have had difficulties at times because when you have a lab group, whether you have 4 people or you have 8 people or 13 people or goodness knows 20 people, there's a lot of personalities in there to work with and mesh well. So I think as a faculty member, I think you have to have a really strong sense of the kind of people you want to work with. I think you also need to make it very clear that you're the boss and that you make the final decisions. And I don't mean to be autocratic, but I'm willing to listen to everybody's opinion, but I want people to understand that I'm responsible for the budget, and I'm responsible for the decisions, and I'm responsible for moving things along in the lab. And so I think that once the lab group knows that you're the boss and that you don't tolerate certain types of behavior, they work pretty well. Now, again, that doesn't mean we haven't had issues. I can remember an infamous call on July 4th one year from my lab group, and it was in crisis. And so I came to work that day, and we got it straightened out. But again, that was all personality issues. So
it's always a challenge to manage that. It's one of the more difficult aspects of the job. And again, likely because there's not a lot of training in management of different individuals during your doctoral studies. So we talked a little bit about tips for faculty members upon being successful. What about for students, undergraduates through the graduate level? What sort of things can they look to do to increase their chances of being successful in academia?
Well, I think with undergraduate students in particular, one of the things that I've said to undergraduate students over and over and over again is don't miss any opportunities that you might have. I have the biggest frustration with my job over the years is that I have seen some really talented students over the years that have not taken full advantage of their talents. That were able, I think, I have one young lady in particular in mind that was at Charlotte, was one of my undergraduates, and she was maybe one of the most brilliant students I've ever had. And she just was not interested in going any further than what she went with undergraduate work. And it was frustrating because, again, you're seeing someone with this great talent that could have such an impact, not necessarily in science, but on the world in general, and they choose not to take that opportunity. And so I've always told undergraduates, take every opportunity that's presented at you. Meet your professors, find out who they are, volunteer to work in their labs. If someone offers you an opportunity to go to a concert someplace, go do these things. And as my caveat is, as long as it's not illegal, immoral, or unethical, take the shot. That's why you're here at university, to find these things out and give it a shot. And because so many people, and I've talked to a lot of former students, and they go, geez, I just wish I would have done that. And they haven't done it. So take every opportunity. And I'd apply that to the graduate students as well. So graduate students are a little bit different because they're a little bit more mature. They've had some more experiences. But again, with graduate students, realize what you're trying to do, and that is get into the business. You're trying to get into the business. So figure out how the business works. And that was something I didn't do. I didn't know how the business worked. And so once you know how the business works, you got a sense of maybe how to approach things.
What are some of your favorite classes that you've taught over the years?
Oh, my all-time favorite class is exercise physiology. That's what got me excited about the business. I was an athlete at Northeast Louisiana University, and I had an exercise physiology class taught by a young faculty member. And that class, I remember, switches going off, going, wow, this is what I really wanted to do. If I wasn't going to be a professional athlete, that was what I wanted to do. At the time, I thought I was going to be a coach. I thought I was going to be a basketball coach or a soccer coach. And after I did my student teaching, I realized that I was not going to be a coach. I wound up teaching math in 7th grade for 1 year, and that even drove me further to come back to the university. But it was exercise physiology that just absolutely lit my bulb on that one. And it was also that same professor who looked at me after class one night and said, "You ever think about being a professor?" And it was like being a person from a rural area with a very small school. I had 12 people in my graduating class. I'd never thought about that. And here was this man saying, you can do this, and here's how you do it. And so again, once again, it's the opportunity. But yeah, that's where exercise physiology got started for me, and I always loved teaching exercise physiology. I don't teach it as much as I used to, but I really always loved that. So
you've had a lot of opportunities that you've taken advantage with over the years. You've worked with NASA. You've worked in racing. What are some of those experiences, and maybe some of your favorites?
So the NASA experience comes back to also something I tell students, and that is don't ever be afraid to talk to anybody. I was at a science convention in my early years of my doctoral program. I was a child of the 60s. I was always excited about NASA, but NASA and exercise physiology didn't really seem to mesh. And but there was a lady who worked at Kennedy Space Center who was doing a presentation, and my advisor, Ed Howley, at the time encouraged me to go up to her and say hello, introduce myself, and tell her what I was interested in. And I did that, and as a result, she invited me to come to Kennedy Space Center for the first time was 2 weeks, a 2-week kind of internship to find out what was going on. And so I wound up going and hanging out in the lab. I took a bus down there from Knoxville, Tennessee to Titusville, Florida. But that 2-week time period led me to go back for 8 months later. They funded some of my research that I wanted to do. I did my dissertation work at NASA. And so the take-home message is, again, don't pass up opportunities. And don't be afraid to talk to people. The worst, as I tell students, I said, the worst thing they can do is be nasty to you. And if they are, then you know something about them and you don't want to work with them. And so those NASA was a fun experience. We got into racing because I raced on the side, auto raced. After Dale Earnhardt's death, I was on the national committee that was looking at that and some of the driver safety things. So, I was one of the only racers in our professional society in the American College of Sports Medicine, and so I got put on that committee. And that was great because I wound up going to Daytona a bunch of times and talking to drivers and working with drivers. And when we moved here to Texas A&M, we actually brought, we had been testing for Tony Stewart's group, and many people maybe will remember Tony Stewart as a driver. But as an owner, he continued to send his crews to us, and we did continue to test with them. And we've done professional musicians, so we've done a lot of fun things. So the most fun with the musicians was one Labor Day at a local biker bar with a band measuring their physiological responses in the midst of all the bikers and a lot of alcohol. It was fun, and for the doc students I had with me, it was quite an experience, especially when the lead singer took off her shirt to take off the wiring that we were using to monitor her heart rate. So again, this academia is a great business,
It is. You never know what you're going to get.
You never know what you're going to get. And it's a great business. You work with a lot of great people and a lot of fun. And but again, it is a business. And so you have to figure out how to navigate your way through. We were talking about earlier academic bullies, a lot of egos, a lot of confidence. And I have a thing on my desk that says, keep smiling because no one will know what you're up to. So.
That is very true. A smile hides all kinds of things.
That's correct. Yeah.
So you have always ended the podcast asking people, what's their last little bit that they want to leave the listeners with? And so for you, what tidbit would you like to leave?
Well, I think it depends on who's listening. I think if you are a student in our business, in the exercise science world, or any student, remember that academia is a path, a job, career path. But it is a career and it is a job, and so there are things to think about. Academia has been really good to me. and to my wife, and we have moved all over the country. We know people all over the world, and growing up on a small farm in North Louisiana, I never thought that these kind of things would happen, and it's happened primarily because of academia. If you're a mid-career faculty member, just continue to put your head down and do the work. It'll all work out, okay? And if you're somebody out there that you're just an interested citizen, think about how we treat our universities of higher education. The universities in our state, and in all states, not just our state, have been chronically underfunded for years and years and years. And people talk about why it costs so much to go to university nowadays, and it's because states continue to cut back on funding for higher education. And if they cut back on that funding, the universities have got to get it from someplace. So they increase tuition. And so that's passed on to the parents and to the students. And so, there's a lot of stories behind the scenes about how higher education works, why it is the way it is. And so reach out to someone that you know that may be in the university and ask them. Just don't believe everything you hear on the radio and TV, because real life is a lot more interesting than what you hear.
It's very true. Or what you read on Facebook that someone's posted.
Right. What is this Facebook you talk about?
I'll hook you up afterwards, so I'll show you where it is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lightfoot, for joining us today and imparting knowledge to those that are starting out and wondering what this path may look like, or even, as you said, interested citizens that may not know what's going on. I think people think of academics as, we sit in our offices and have a tobacco pipe and a tweed jacket with leather patches, and we just pontificate all day long. But there's a lot more to it than,
Well, and I'll say, I feel so strongly about this. This is why my wife and I have started a business for this, Academic Career Development Services. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be moving in doing, is because it's important to help people in this business move forward in this business.
Do you have a website or something that you'd like to leave for that business?
academiccareerdevelopment.com.
Awesome.
Thank you,
so
Dr.
much.
Yentes.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, if you have any comments or questions for us, please find us at huffines.institute.org, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening. The Sports Medicine Podcast is rebranding and will now be known as We Do the Heavy Lifting. Stay tuned for more episodes in 2013. Until next time, this is the Huffines Institute wishing you an active and healthy holiday.